Gracious and loving God, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be acceptable unto you, my God, my strength, and my redeemer. Amen.
Amen.
So Annas, the high priest, asked John and Alexander, by what power do you do this? By what power do you do this? Now, you know, if you were sitting there in Annas's place, what might you be thinking? Ah, it's a work of the devil. Ah, they can do this because they're not paying attention to God. Ah, many other things, right? But John replied. He says, we do this in the name of Christ. We do this through the Spirit of God. So they cured. They laid their hands on people, or sometimes they just stood back and said, be well. Be well. And the people were healed, using the name of Christ. Somehow I don't think it was just the name of Christ. You know, because in the house where I grew up, sometimes folks used the name of Christ, and it wasn't for healing. It wasn't the name for healing. But they did it in the name of Christ. They drew on the power of the Spirit. They drew on the power of God. And I guess that they were something like a prism. They focused that power. And people were healed. You know, today we look at those scriptures and we can see that, you know, way back then they probably could heal with their hands, you know. Probably way back then they could do it. John and Alexander and the other disciples who had been in direct contact with Jesus could heal. And we can accept that. It's far enough back that we can buy it, right? Somehow, those people had powers to do things that we can't do today. Can't be done today. But what is healing? What does it really mean? You know, is it the laying on of hands? You know, if that's all, there are some people who seem to have that power today. But, you know, most of the people I talk to don't really buy that. Don't really buy that. Okay. Because we live in a science-based, critical, and maybe even cynical world. We embody the spirit of Thomas. You remember Thomas, don't you? Mm-hmm. We doubt. We doubt. You know, we may say that we believe. We do. We say it all the time. We believe that we can be healed by prayer. But, you know, when push comes to shove, we go to the doctor. I'm not saying that's bad. It's probably the right thing to do. But, there's this healing that we're called to accept. What is it? If it's not physical, you know, if it's not that we'll be lifted up from the dead, or that my knees will get fixed, or that we won't have a fever anymore, or that AIDS will go away, or name any number of things. If it's not that, what is it? What is it that we need to be healed of? You know, maybe the healing that we're called to accept, even the healing that we're asked to do in the name of Christ, is a different kind of thing altogether. Maybe we need to look at the ways that we and those around us and maybe the whole world is sick. You know, do you ever feel like you are just not a part of the world around you? You feel kind of separate. Kind of, I don't know, different. You know, we all feel that way sometimes. We feel separate. And each one of us, every single one of us here, can identify ourselves and how we see ourselves, and we can say, well, I'm different from him. And I'm different from him. And I'm different from her. So I'm different. We're not the same. And I'm different from that group of people when I went to school. You all remember them?
No.
Let's see, they were the jocks or the smart kids or the
Bullies.
Well, I wasn't that different from them. But we feel that way.
Yeah.
We feel that way. We focus on our differences. We focus on how I'm different from you and how we're far apart. And then we become separate. We become apart because we've decided that we are apart. Do you ever feel like the world hates you? Some of us have felt that way. Do you ever feel like you're in constant danger? Sometimes that makes sense. Most of the time it doesn't. Do you ever feel like there's no way for you to provide for yourself and for your loved ones? Again, sometimes it makes sense. Sometimes it doesn't. You know, maybe these feelings, and maybe even these realities are symptoms of illness. They are symptoms that we as individuals are separated from God. And that we're separated from each other. They are symptoms that groups of us are separated from each other. And groups can be very small. Sometimes I'm a group of one. Sometimes it's a family. Sometimes it's your gang. And gang is not necessarily a negative. Your group. Sometimes a group is as large as a nation. But those groups not only feel separated, they actively work to separate themselves from each other. From each other. And that becomes not only a physical separation, it becomes a spiritual separation. That's, I think, the separation that Jesus was talking about. Maybe that's what John was talking about. You know, Jesus used lots of rural stories to explain to the disciples and to explain to the crowds. And, you know, sometimes for us, urban people that we are, sometimes they're a little distant. We have trouble understanding because we live in this urban world. We live in this world where we are constantly connected to people, maybe all the way across the world. Now Jesus told another one of those stories. He called himself the Good Shepherd who looked out for the sheep. Or maybe the cheap, too.
The cheap sheep.
How many of you have ever raised sheep? Okay, one person understands here. But you know, we might describe Jesus as the person who tended the flock, who tended the sheep, as a good parent or a good leader. He was concerned with the people around him. He was so concerned with the people around him that he went out of his way to find them, out of his way to touch them, out of his way to find ways to help them to heal. He understood that being lost is not merely a physical phenomenon. He understood that we can be lost emotionally. We can be lost when we just can't figure out what the next right thing to do is. We can be lost in so many ways. But we can have hope. We can have hope. We can have hope in the knowledge that we can be found. And you don't even have to put up a balloon or fire a flare. You can be found. We can be brought into the fold. We can be brought into that group of people who love us. We can be cured of our lack of faith. You can't find faith just by saying, I'm going to go have some faith today. It has to be given to you. And we can be cured. We can be cured of our anger and our fear. And like the sheep, we can feel safe. Now, here's the problem, my friends. We cannot wait. We cannot wait for Jesus to wander in through the back door and accomplish this for us. It doesn't work that way. Because we, each and every one of us, and all of us together, we are called to call upon the power of God. To call upon the power of God to help us to find ourselves. And to help us to reach out to other people so that they too can find themselves. We don't have to be spiritually separated. We don't have to be. We don't have to hide in our little closets. We can be together. We can find that love. But we have to act. We have to do something. Like the disciples, we are called to reach out. To reach out. Reach out the person next to us. Just reach out to the person next to us and demonstrate to that person that love is there. I'm not suggesting that as you go out on the street today, you grab the first person you see and give them a big hug. Because that person may not be accepting of that love. They may not be ready for it. But you know what? Hello works pretty nicely. It's a beautiful day, works pretty nicely. And it makes a little bit of a connection. Make a connection. Show love. Love is there. That is the work of the shepherd. And that is the work of the sheep. So, not only do we have to go out and demonstrate love, you know what? We have to pay attention. We have to look at those people around us and look for the love that they're wanting to give. And we have to accept that love. Because you need to reach out. We need to accept and look for that love. We have to do it. We have to look for it until we find it. We have to look for it until we find it, because that saves people. And it saves people not only in the religious sense, it saves them in the actual physical sense here and now today. And it saves us, not only in the religious sense, but in the actual physical sense today. So, I'm going to sound like my mother for a minute. Don't be lost. Don't be lost. Don't be lost. Call upon the power of God, because it's there for you. Call upon the power of Jesus, because it's there for you. Call upon the disciples. Find the power, because it's there if you look for it. It's there if you feel for it. It's there if you meditate on it. It's there. Find the power. And then reach out. Because you, every single one of you, and I, have the power to let other people know that they too are found.